Hello, everybody joining us. Great. So good to see you all. Little by little, as I scroll, I have to scroll to see you all. All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started. So good afternoon and welcome to today's Health Profession Educator series session on education leadership skills. So we've invited 3 exemplary educational leaders from within our own organization to share with you their experiences and guidance and what they've learned throughout their various roles. So as I often hear our own Dr. Ollendorf say, in medical education within an organization, we have one learning environment. If you look around, however, you're going to see a myriad of leadership opportunities within the learning environment. So all contributing to the greater good of our learners, our team members, and ultimately our patients. So today's presenters will help enlighten us on at least 3 leadership roles. So Dr. Amanda Murchison is Program Director for the OBGYN Residency Program at Carilion Clinic and Associate Professor for OBGYN through Virginia Tech Carilion School of Medicine. Dr. Aubrey Knight is Senior Dean of Student Affairs at VTCSOM and Professor of Internal Medicine and Family and Community Medicine, and also Geriatrician at Carilion Clinic Center for Healthy Aging. And Dr. Alan Blackwood is Clerkship Director for Internal Medicine and at VTCSOM and Associate Professor for Internal Medicine and Pediatrics at VTCSOM. So this is intended to really be an interactive session. Initially, it was supposed to be a hybrid session. So we want to maintain, even though we pivoted, we want to maintain that level of interaction as much as possible. There should be plenty of time for questions and discussion at the end of the presentation. But if you have questions or comments throughout, please feel free to type them in the chat or just unmute yourselves throughout if you feel the need. So let us know. We want to hear from you too. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to today's speakers. Take it away, folks.
Thanks, Sherry. And Mariah, we can go to the next slide. So thank you everyone for your attention and for being here. I am honored to be on a panel with my colleagues, Dr. Murchison and Blackwood, and am looking forward to kind of learning myself. Just because this is a session on educational leadership, we must start with learning objectives. And so our objectives for this session will be to kind of list some qualities of what makes a good educational leader, talk about some different pathways toward those roles, ways that you can get involved, and then we'll talk a little bit about using a coaching approach to individual, especially opportunities for educating our various learners. We can go to the next slide, and we're gonna start out. So as Sherry mentioned, we had intended on this being more of a live presentation, and we're going to make it very much of a panel presentation, such that it was going to be Q&A from the beginning and audience participation from the beginning. So we're going to do audience participation from the beginning. What I would like you all to think about is send us in chat or yell out, probably send us in chat, what you consider to be qualities or characteristics of educational leaders. Any thoughts about that?
Active listening.
Yeah, now we're seeing it. Humility, transparency, willing to learn, giving of their time, willing to learn, present and available, communication, active listening, great stuff. I mean, this is so I love the direction you're going here, and it's not, you know, I don't see a lot of things, but non-judgmental, connection, open to input. These are all communication styles and not, you know, being able to check boxes and those kinds of things. I love this, and because, you know, availability, collaboration, active listening, humility, all those things, non-judgmental. This is great. You know, it would be awesome if we could take all of your suggestions and make one of those slides that show all of what you've said. But I think we are off to a great start, because these are the kinds of things that I think the panelists would agree are the starting points for qualities of an educational leader. We're going to go onto the next slide and spend a few minutes just sharing a little bit about our journeys into educational leadership. And I'm going to get started and turn it over to Dr. Blackwood after that. I never considered, so early in my medical school residency and practice, I never really considered myself to be an educator, and certainly did not consider myself to be a leader. But it was through just my willingness to kind of listen to what was going on around me, take feedback from others, and figure out the things that really gave me, that really filled my tank, and made me want to do all the other things that I was doing. And as I did that, it became pretty clear to me that it was some of the, especially the educational things, not so much leadership at that point. So I ended up leaving my private family medicine practice to do a faculty development in geriatrics fellowship. And it was through the fellowship and the training that I got in the fellowship that I began to understand what some of the qualities were, and to sought ways that I could enhance those qualities. I came back to Roanoke, and the rest of it has just kind of been a journey through a bunch of different positions, from family medicine faculty member to family medicine residency director to geriatric fellowship director to palliative medicine fellowship director, and then ultimately over to the medical school, where I've moved from more graduate medical education to undergraduate medical education. I have wonderful memories at each step along the way, and I tell people this all the time. All of them were steps. I don't believe I would have been prepared for what I'm doing these days straight out of residency, or even straight out of my fellowship, because everything else kind of built on the skills, the experiences that I had in those other roles. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the specifics in a few minutes. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Blackwood and let him share a little bit of his journey in educational leadership.
Thanks, Aubrey. You certainly are an example to all of us, and have been a mentor of mine over the years as well. So Amanda, thank you for finding these pictures. Unfortunately, I think we've aged a little bit, except for you, Aubrey. You've not aged at all. You're still 29, so you still look 29. But I don't think my pathway to clerkship director was all that deliberate. So, we've had students in Roanoke for decades. And so before VCOM and VTC, the University of Virginia students came to Roanoke. And so that started many decades ago. So at any one point, we had 30 to 40% of the third year class of the University of Virginia rotating in Roanoke and Salem. And so we were a big site for their clinical education across all the clerkships. And so Dr. Buck Crockett kind of started that many years ago. And as he was retiring, he passed that off to Dr. Bill Irwin. And I think Dr. Irwin at that time was also the residency director of our transitional year that we had, a transitional internship. And so I think as he was starting to cut back a little bit as well, we were walking down the hall. I was walking down the hall with Dr. Irwin one day, and he said, "Alan, you're going to take over the students." And so that's how I got that role. And so he called up Dr. Mike Ryan. I see Charlie Schluepner on the line. So at that time, Mike Ryan, infectious disease, was the clerkship director in Charlottesville. And so Bill called up Dr. Ryan and said, "Mike, come to Roanoke. You're going to have dinner with a new guy." And so he took us all out to dinner, and that's how I got to be clerkship director starting there. So, and that was great. That was we were a site And so all of the LCME stuff had to, happen in Charlottesville. And so I wasn't really responsible for that, but I got to learn about that kind of early on. And so we would go to Charlottesville once or twice a year for a full day meeting with all the clerkship directors and kind of learn about the LCME requirements and learn about the different, the deans of the school. And so that was a great learning experience for me. Great to kind of learn from the UVA folks. And then VCOM comes on board. And of course, we start taking their students on as well. And then, of course, VTC comes on board. And I'm not sure really how I became the clerkship director of VTC. I think Dr. Harrington just started sending me emails of things to do and telling me to go to this meeting and that meeting. And so I think that's kind of how I wound up doing that. But it's been a great experience, and it certainly has helped me grow a lot. Amanda, how about you've had a very deliberate process and a very deliberate route, and you've had a lot of mentoring along the way. So tell us your journey.
Yeah, so I think for me, kind of like Aubrey, I actually started in private practice for the first 3 years out of residency. And so I think during that private practice, I realized that I missed being around students and residents because I had always been in fairly large academic centers. And so when I came to Roanoke, I had the opportunity fairly early on to become the clerkship director. Just like Alan said, at the time we had UVA students. So it was a really good opportunity to kind of get my feet wet without having our own students. And so from there, the medical school started here, so I was able to be involved with sort of starting the clerkships here. At the time, we were a much smaller OBGYN department, so I actually started a couple years after the clerkship director with sort of another leadership opportunity of being the assistant residency program director at the same time. And then about 7 years ago, transitioned out of the clerkship and into the residency program. I think one of the things that I wanted to highlight on my journey was I had the opportunity to do a national leadership sort of group. And so through OBGYN, one of the opportunities, there's something called the APCO Scholars and Leaders Program, and it's an 18-month program where you are kind of in a peer group with other people that are sort of later part of their early career to kind of early part of their mid-career, where you meet multiple times a year and you end up with this peer group that kind of you grow together. And still today, we have a chat group that, people can pose questions. And I think it also gives you a little bit of peer pressure, when you see these people sort of advancing in their career, and now many of them are vice chairs or chairs or have moved into the dean's office, it kind of, it makes you sort of reevaluate your own career goals and kind of challenges yourself as well. So, I do think a lot of those opportunities exist. We even have some leadership opportunities for faculty development at Carillion, besides teach, which you can do obviously these sessions, but we have some actual sort of continuing leadership sessions. So I think those can be really important in someone's career. I think next slide. So educational leadership is actually a topic that's not really widely published about. And so, when I went to start putting kind of my part of this talk together, there really wasn't a lot of information out there. But I thought that this study was really interesting. As a side note, the literature that's out there is, for the most part, not specifically healthcare related. Most of these are about university type systems, which oftentimes include the medical school or maybe a vet school. But these are also talking about professors who may be teaching, chemistry. And so they're kind of all lumped into a group. But this study that was done in Canada took a group of kind of that same late early career to mid-career and identified them as people that they wanted to help develop into leadership roles. And so through their leadership group, which was actually a fairly short process of 3 months, the students of that group sort of came up with these qualities that they felt really reflected a leader. And so I think this shows a lot of the things that you guys said at the very beginning of the talk. So having those sort of effective qualities of humility and showing empathy, establishing trust, they have to be action oriented. So They have to be able to affect change. You have to be able to take some risks. You have to be able to look at what's that long-term transformation that you're trying to achieve. They have to be able to mentor and empower the people they're trying to lead. So whether that's students or residents or faculty, and then have some teaching excellence. Obviously, you know, we're in teaching roles. So empowering the learner, helping the learner to achieve their goals. And then there's research and other forms of academic scholarship. And I thought it was interesting because these last two, teaching and research and scholarship, that's oftentimes where we as faculty really get our academic credibility. And it doesn't mean that the other three categories aren't important, but oftentimes when it comes to promotion, you know, going from assistant professor to associate professor, the teaching excellence and then your research is really what's going to give you that academic credibility. So next slide. There was some information that's been published specifically on leaders in healthcare education. And I thought what was kind of interesting about this is that it recognized that as leaders in healthcare, we actually kind of have to have skills in two buckets. We have to actually be managers, as well as kind of have some of those leadership skills that would be more reflected in that last slide. So for management, we have to provide order to whatever group we're managing. So a lot of times for many of us, I know for Alan and I, a lot of that's scheduling. I mean, the amount of sort of time and effort I put into sort of the daily schedules is, it's a lot of moving people. Consistency is really important. And, you know, there usually comes some sort of budget responsibility. So that may be fairly small, but for some, like for Dr. Vid, who runs an internal medicine residency program with 80 residents, that can be pretty large. And then we have that other bucket, which is maybe a little bit more of what we think about with leadership, which is, you know, creating that shared vision, making sure that you're always kind of moving in the direction that you need to move in. And then influencing and connecting people. Next slide. So we're going to each kind of talk about our some of the leadership categories. So Dr. Blackwood.
Yes. So, you know, I think we're all familiar with different leadership styles. I'm not an expert on leadership styles, but I've begun to read a little bit about it and try to find my style. And I would encourage you, if you've not kind of read about leadership styles and kind of know what yours is, to kind of pick up some books or pick up some literature and kind of delve into that. But so this kind of dovetails into what Amanda was saying about management and leadership. And so kind of one of the articles I was looking at kind of summed it up very nicely. I thought I'll just read you a quick sentence here. A new type of leader is emerging, one who role models the balance between autonomy and accountability, which you see on the slide here, emphasizes teamwork, and focuses on improving patient outcomes. And I thought that summed up very nicely kind of an educational leader. And so they also kind of talk about transactional leadership and transformational leadership, and that's what Amanda was talking about as well. So, you know, with the transformational leadership, it's all about empowering people, empowering your team, setting goals, teamwork, clarifying roles, and bringing them along that journey, and empowering them to take over that journey of the goal. And so, but not everybody wants to do that. Not everybody wants to kind of be empowered to make change in the program. And so for them, it's more of a transactional thing. You still have to let them know you're still a part of the team. You're a very valuable part of the team. You're accountable. These are the things that you have to do. And it's more of a transactional relationship that you have with them. So just kind of things to think about, and some kind of bullet points up here that to think about that in transactional versus transformational leadership. Next slide. And so, you know, again, you have to have some knowledge related to your position for, so as far as the clerkship goes, I kind of told you earlier that I learned from the UVA folks. And then as VTC came online, I joined a group called Clerkship Directors in Internal Medicine. That's our national organization. And they are very well-connected people. They have listservs that I'm a part of. They have national meetings. And so I kind of just early on went to those meetings. They have a lot of mentoring possibilities. They have a lot of education. And I got to learn from some of the giants in internal medicine clerkships through that journey. And so that's certainly a very valuable resource. as our school was coming online, as we were building it, we had to become very familiar with the LCME requirements. And so I got very versed in that and the educational requirements that we had to do as a clerkship to meet those requirements. So Amanda, I think you also have things that you want to talk about as program director.
Yeah, so sort of the flip side with the residency program are all of the ACGME requirements. And so I'm sure many of you hear program directors talking about duty hour requirements and, specific, we have to do milestones and things like that. So the ACGME puts out a document called the Common Program Requirements, and the link is here, but you can also just Google Common Program Requirements ACGME and it will pop up for you. It can change every year. It doesn't always have significant changes, but the new one goes into effect July, so the beginning of the academic year. And it's very helpful. So if you have any questions about why there are certain requirements, those are explained in the Common Program Requirements. Each specialty also has specialty specific requirements, but they really don't differ that much from the Common Program Requirements. So I think if you have an understanding of the Common Program Requirements, the specialty specific requirements are usually just kind of fine tuning those. Next slide.
So the ACGME also has or is recently embarking on a milestone project for clinician educator. So as if you're involved in residency education, you know that for the last, I don't know, 10 or 15 years, the ACGME has been moving toward milestones for graduate medical education. The first set of those have been replaced in maybe all specialties at this point by the next iteration, which is much more specific and specialties related. But in addition to the individual residencies, they've created or are creating a clinician educator milestone. And the reason I say are creating is because this is still in draft form. They have not finalized this yet. But even though this is specific to graduate medical education, I think the milestones encompass the entire gamut of undergraduate, graduate, and continuing medical education. The kinds of things that are highlighted from foundational reflective practice and commitment to personal growth in your own well-being, to barrier and bias mitigation, through teaching professionalism and learner assessment related to educational theory and practice. The milestones are essentially 5 different categories: foundational educational theory and practice, which is the next 3, the 3 boxes on the right-hand side, and then well-being of self, learner, and colleagues, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and then administrative skills. Putting administrative skills last, I think, is kind of interesting and probably telling. As I mentioned when we did that first set of questions, what makes an effective teacher? I think we all migrated toward those foundational practical things and not so much the administrative stuff. But the administrative skills are still there and still necessary, and we still have to check boxes, dot I's, and cross T's. But I encourage you to, I think on our resource page, we have the link to this. I encourage you to go there. There's a lot of really rich information and guidance in this milestone project. And once they create the final one, I think there will be even more resources available to guide us and for us to use as we're trying to grow our own educational portfolio. Next slide, Mariah. So we're going to move now from the philosophical to the more practical as pertains to being a faculty member here, and how can you get involved if you're not involved at this point. And we'll start with what are ways that if you're not currently involved in the medical school that you might be able to be involved. And I've identified 6 here. There are more than 6, but there certainly are these 6 that we're always looking for willing clinicians and faculty members who are basic science to be involved in. LACE is the longitudinal ambulatory clinical experience, and the students from the first 2 years are taught clinical medicine from the very beginning, not only in the classroom and in the OSCE suite here, but also in your offices through the LACE program. So Dr. Schmidt-Dalton leads that. And if you're interested and would like to learn more about it, I encourage you to contact her or me, and I can direct you there for that program. We're always looking for willing LACE preceptors. There are lectures and workshops both in the clinical area, but also in the basic science area. As you know, we're a problem-based, patient-centered curriculum here, and so we are incorporating our 4 value domains into the entire curriculum of the first 2 years. So we rely on our clinical faculty to assist with these. Our problem-based learning, case-based teaching is done by facilitators, and we have clinician facilitators who assist in those areas. There are committees. I've listed 4 here. There may be others, but certainly the admissions committee is always looking for willing faculty members. The medical school curriculum committee, the medical student performance and promotions committee, and the learning environment advocacy committee all need people who are passionate about education and about innovation in education to be a part of those committees. We look for student advisors and student mentors, primarily specialty specific, but also in other areas, that providing advice and guidance that can be formal or informal. Students are going to, I hear this all the time from students, that they tell me about a conversation they had with one of you, and how rich that was, how important that was, and how informative it was to decision making that they're having to decide, especially as it pertains to specialty determinations. And then finally, the VTC-SOM mentoring communities, which used to be called PTLCs or physician thought leader communities, are those formal groups that are made up of a faculty mentor or faculty mentors, residents and students to kind of help them and us through the challenges that are faced in medicine, in graduate medical education, and in undergraduate medical education. So there are numerous ways that you can get involved, and we encourage you, if you're not already, to help allow us to help you find that place that fits you. Next slide.
Yeah, so ways to get involved on the clerkship level. I'm speaking for all the clerkships. We all have a didactic series. We give lectures. We have physical diagnosis rounds and various things. So certainly, if you've got a presentation or something that you would like to do, or an interactive kind of session that you would like to do with the students in any specialty, your clerkship director would love to have you involved with that. And so likewise, I think if you're being a preceptor and having students come to your clinic, or making an elective for students is another way to kind of get exposure to students. And again, all of the clerkships on all the departments would welcome that. And Amanda, how can you get involved with the residency?
Yeah, so next slide. Yeah, so there's lots of ways to get involved with the residency. I think, a good place to start would just be to meet with the program director and see sort of where the areas of need are. Unfortunately, as a program director, we don't necessarily have the power to give you protected time to do some of these things. But if you feel like you could accommodate, putting something into your schedule, then the program directors, I would imagine, would be very happy to have you help. Some of the things that I do with faculty in my own program is in that last box. So I have a faculty member who basically is in charge of journal club. So he, picks the articles, he organizes that, and that's a huge help. I have somebody who is in charge of mock oral exams. So our residents do a mock oral exam at the end of their year, so in the spring every year, and this requires organization. We have structured cases, and this person really keeps this updated and facilitates that. I have somebody else who is in charge of the GYN portion of our simulation curriculum. I didn't put it on this slide, but I have somebody else who is in charge of our resident research curriculum. That person does actually have a little bit of protected time. So sometimes the program director can work with the chair in those really big jobs to try to see if we can carve out a little bit of time for you. The program director actually appoints members to two big committees. Those are the Clinical Competency Committee and the Program Evaluation Committee. So every residency program is going to have both of these committees. They're each a little bit different. So the Clinical Competency Committee, really their job is to kind of do a deep dive on residents at least twice a year. Some of the larger programs meet more often, but to really kind of keep abreast of where that resident stands in the milestones. It's this committee that makes recommendations to the program director regarding promotion, remediation, or even probation. And so this committee is really, really important. The program evaluation committee is a little bit different. They are really sort of evaluating the program as far as its curriculum, the specific rotations. This committee also has residents on it, whereas the Clinical Competency Committee would not have residents on it. And so they sort of kind of help create the vision of where do we need to go next in the residency program. In general, I would say this isn't a hard and fast rule, but oftentimes program directors would probably prefer that maybe you've been here for a couple of years just to really understand sort of the workings of the residency program before serving on one of these committees. Of course, we need mentors for our residents. And one of the other things that we really need help with are when residents are struggling, whether it's they're struggling really more in their personal life, or if they're struggling with fund of knowledge or surgical skills, administrative type skills. We often develop practice improvement plans. And these are super time consuming to sort of help these residents and give them individualized attention. So if there are faculty members who are willing to kind of sit down with residents and help them through these plans, that's really, really helpful to the program director. Next slide. Alan, do you want to talk about this, or do you want me to? I don't hear Alan, so I'm going to go ahead and talk about this. So we spoke a little bit, or I did, about some of the leadership opportunities that are available through your own national organizations. But you can also just attend national meetings and gain a lot of knowledge. So the ACGME has national meetings. Each specialty has meetings that are specific to their clerkship directors, to their residency program directors. Sometimes those meetings are combined, sometimes they're separate. And anybody is welcome to attend those meetings. And then I spoke a little bit about specialty specific leadership programs. I did want to highlight the double AMC has a early career and a mid-career leadership program for women. I attended the early career leadership program many years ago and found that to also be very helpful. That's something that you could consider. And I think they also have a program for minorities, but I don't know very much about that program. And then of course, taking advantage of TEACH, which we have here. Next slide. So the last thing, just before we kind of open the panel up, this is sort of taking a different direction, but we didn't want to end this talk without kind of talking a little bit about the principles of coaching. I think we've all found the coaching principle really helpful in our day-to-day job. And, you know, coaching, when you have interactions with the people you're going to encounter in these roles, you know, the people we work with, they're all bright and they are adult learners. And so if you can approach conversations from more of a coaching format, I think that oftentimes you will really find that really opens conversation and can really kind of help the person that you're trying to work with. So this would just be an example of, let's say that I'm meeting as the OBGYN residency program director with a resident who's struggling to teach in the operating room. Perhaps we received a student evaluation that just kind of shed some concern about the learning environment specific to the operating room. So in meeting with that resident, you could kind of pose some questions like, how do you think the students might describe your interactions in the operating room? And giving them a chance to kind of talk through that. When teaching in the operating room, what do you find most challenging? Do you have ideas about how you could foster a more positive learning environment in the operating room? What resources do you feel like you need to be successful at teaching in the operating room? And I always like to kind of end the conversation with what would be the first step you could take? Because I think if they can leave with 1, 2, or even 3 things in their sort of toolkit, I find that they're almost always successful. And this, you can kind of fit this into your coaching session. This is maybe phrased a little bit more in the negative side, but if you could change one thing, what would it be? And I think really what we're trying to ask is, you know, what's your quick win is what we're trying to find. Because as somebody in a leadership role, there might be something small that you could change for them that would make a big impact. And sometimes this question too, I think, helps to reveal frustrations that they're having, which you might be able to intervene on, or you might be able to get them help somewhere else to sort of help them with that. Aubrey, do you have anything else to add in your kind of interactions with the students? And you're on mute.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think coaching, mentoring and coaching are, sorry about that, are crucial. And I think it does, and for me anyway, it required me to really hone that skill and to know the kinds of questions to ask that are going to provide value both for me in understanding where a student or a resident is, but also in them helping to understand how the feedback I'm giving them is to be used effectively.
Yeah, and you can actually, if you are meeting with somebody, you can actually Google, you know, coaching, and you'll come up with 100 different like sample questions that you might be able to use in a meeting that you might be having. Next slide. I know Alan lost his internet access. I don't know if he's back with us.
Like
I'm
he's
back.
back.
He's back.
Exact.
I think we just wanted to open it up, and that maybe Sherry or Mariah could help with the chat box, but you're welcome to unmute yourself and ask questions to any of our panel members or put it in the chat.
Yes, please feel free, unmute, type it in, whatever. I did want to make a few comments. Excellent presentation. I mean, these are great resources. Folks ask me all the time, what do I do to get involved in educational leadership? And I said, it depends on which type of educational leadership. There are certain things that are you know, common across the continuum, and then certain things like the PEC, CCC, or UMA committees, if you want to be called, you know, depending on which point of the continuum you want to become involved. Lots of us have been doing interviews for chairs recently, and I'm always thinking of, from my perspective, when I'm interviewing a potential chair candidate, even, I want somebody who has had experience with education, just because I'm so involved in education. That's my passion. So these are important, whether you want to become get in one of these roles and stop, or if you want to keep on going throughout medical education leadership, or health professions education leadership. All important points, wonderful resources, next steps. I think also, one more thing that Deb wanted me to remind all of you, if you all, just as an aside, have a name that is not discernible within your Zoom account, if you could just either text her or make your name discernible in the text, that would be great, so she can count you as being here. Okay, so Dr. Ollendorf says, can you please expand on the value of getting involved at any level of education?
Yeah, I mean, I think you could take this several different ways, but I think, number one, there's no, whether it's at the medical student level from, preclinical years through residency, fellowship, or getting involved really with faculty, who need mentoring as well. There's no right or wrong path. People can start in one place, and kind of like Alan, he's kind of stayed in that clerkship role, and many people do that, versus maybe me, where I kind of went from clerkship director to residency program director and moved around a little bit. But I think as a leader, you can get involved in any one of those spectrums. And I think as somebody who's looking to get involved in leadership, start somewhere. It can be by joining one committee, and then maybe you'll sort of figure out where your passion lies. And it is hard, I understand, in an academic setting. I mean, leadership opportunities don't always come up all the time, as far as, specifically named leadership opportunities. But I think one of the things I've learned is you don't have to have a title to be an educational leader. So, you can be a leader regardless if you have that title or not.
And I agree with that. I mean, absolutely. We have formal and informal, both educational and leadership roles. But I'd like to expand on Dr. Ohlendorf's question by saying, and I think the way he posed the question was the value. So there is value to the institution, to the medical school and to the graduate medical education institution by your becoming involved. There's value to the learner because you are giving them, you are sharing with them your knowledge and your skills, and mentoring them through a challenging period in their lives. But there's also value to us individually.
Person, right?
Having to be on top of your game for learners has made me have to stay up to date and be sure that I'm not only conveying up-to-date information, but doing it in such a way that they're able to hear. So I've needed to stay on top of my game because I've got learners. So there's value across all three of those spectrums.
Honestly, participating on a variety of educational leadership committees, I'd say your colleagues, you're benefiting your colleagues. Also, I learn something every single time I participate in one of those committees, just from the complementary strengths of all of the individuals on that committee. It's really a community. You get to know your colleagues and you're involved. And then that may be just getting started on these committees, may be a way of helping you to realize what's your favorite point on that continuum. Mine has definitely shifted throughout my years in medical education, but. What is one great piece of advice or feedback you have received from a mentor or learner on your journeys to your current positions? Tyler Wilson. Great question, Tyler.
Yeah, I think for me, and maybe my journey, has been kind of jumping back and forth between students and residents. But, kind of learned that piece of advice of there are certain tickets that you kind of want to punch, and like certain experiences. And I think that kind of leads back to what Aubrey said about, he learned something from each role, and he wouldn't have necessarily been prepared for that role had he not have done a previous role. And so I think just sort of taking full advantage of each opportunity you have, and what skills can you gain from that experience that you'll be able to take to the next experience. So just kind of punching your ticket along the way.
I think that is a great question, Tyler. As I'm looking through the list of folks that are here, I can't help but recognize that some of my mentors, some of my some of the folks that have been involved in my education. There's someone on the line right now who was a resident when I was a medical student. There are a couple of you who were faculty members when I was a resident. It's just the fact that I'm participating as one of the presenters of this when I'm looking over there and seeing these giants that are in the audience. But I digress here. The thing that has stuck with me, and I hope I've lived, has been availability. Has just been being there, and being there for the learners or my patients also, but for the learners. That's the one bit of advice that I hope has been one that I've lived out.
Yes, and for me, it's culture, a culture of yes. And so, there's so many barriers that we put up to in education and in healthcare. And so, having a culture of positivity and a culture of yes, trying to find the solution was some advice that I received early on that's been very beneficial. So I think there's a couple of more questions here.
Dr. Wilson, I also really like your question, and it leads me to make a comment on something else. So connecting with your mentors and having these conversations with your mentors, if you're interested in moving forward, they may know of other opportunities that you haven't even heard of or heard about throughout the organization or within your specialty societies, et cetera, that would be great opportunities for you to participate in. We also are starting a more formal mentoring program. This fall, we're starting a pilot. It's called TMAP. It's for more junior faculty members to connect more formally with some mentors. If you don't already have one, mentors come in all shapes and sizes, formal, informal, within your specialty, outside your specialty. So look for those mentors and ask them for additional guidance with regards to leadership opportunities. Dr. Ollendorf says, a paperweight given to me by my first mentor in education at Cincinnati. I don't know if you all.
There's a picture attached.
It's making me download it, Arthur.
Oh, sorry.
Can anybody else see it?
It says to teach is to learn twice.
Oh,
And it still sits on my desk 30 years later. Well, not quite 30. We'll say 26. I'll feel better.
Great advice. Oop, there it is. And popped up. Love that. There are questions or comments? Anything you all have learned, the participants? I too see so many of our outstanding leaders throughout the participants today. So at any point in your leadership journey, if you want to share anything that you've learned.
I have a question for the panelists. Did any of you all receive any formal leadership training as part of your medical school or residency curricula? In other words, was leadership something that you were taught formally in the medical school curriculum or in your residency program?
Definitely not in medical school. I was a chief resident, so I was provided some opportunity through that to get some leadership training, but it wasn't embedded per se in my residency. Of course, I did residency 40 years ago, so.
I would say the same. I think being a chief resident, the senior year, or for OB, it's the last year of residency. We had a lot of leadership roles, but can't really think of anything formal in medical school.
The same with me.
Dr. Mishra has his hand up. Baba.
Yes, sir, Dr. Knight. I actually like Dr. Murchison's comment on, and of course, a mentor, because that really demonstrates what the change has been in education. Because I know in education, when I started out even, and it wasn't that long ago, it doesn't seem like, not 4 years ago, but maybe a little bit longer. And it seems that it was like, okay, here's the spigot, drink all you can, and then you're going to have to be responsible for it. And now we're focused on how effective is this education? And I think that's the right strategy, but it's very telling that what the comments were.
Like David posted in the chat, our regional SGEA, the Southern Group on Educational Affairs, it's a regional organization, like a smaller version of the AAMC. So there's a special interest group on leadership in medical education, which meets approximately monthly. Happy to provide more information if anybody is interested. So if you are, go ahead and contact Dr. Musick and he will show you how to get more involved in that group. But becoming involved at a regional level, local, regional, national level, growing in those roles is another way. Seems curious that we all expect physicians to be leaders in a variety of contexts, but we don't really provide the education on leadership as a part of formal training.
I do think we're better about that now. I can't speak at the first and second year level, but I know in our residency program, we have a series of 4 lectures about how to be a teacher, you know, for the students. And so that's repeated every 2 years. So kind of every 6 months, there's a lecture that's given. So I think there is more emphasis on how to be a teacher, at least at the residency level. Are there things at the leadership things at the student level now, Dr. Knight, or?
Yes, there are through the AAMC and its various groups. Absolutely.
Looks like Dr. Bazinji and then Dr. Misra. Questions as well?
One thing, this is Chalak Berzinji. One thing I wanted to say, we always think of mentors as somebody very senior to us, usually a senior faculty member and a young or an early junior faculty. I think mentors can be the other way around. I found to myself a junior faculty that joined us many years back, that was many years junior than me. And I found a lot of talent and interest in him that I went to him and actually I asked him to be my mentor. And I found tremendous value in that. So I just wanted to make that comment that mentors not necessarily need to be a very junior, a senior person. Sometimes it can be the other way around.
Great. Good.
Yeah, I think another thing with that too is sometimes those more junior people may have a lot more enthusiasm and, you know, they're really excited to be mentors. Maybe the first time that maybe they've been a mentor formally. So I think that's a great, you know, a great point to bring up.
Dr. Ohlendorf mentioned it's only a matter of time until we have more curriculum on leadership training. As we add competencies, we need to remove curricular items or lengthen training, which I don't know if anybody's in favor of lengthening that training at this point. Dr. Smith, some professional organizations have begun to embrace the idea of evidence-based education. Absolutely. And Dr. Misra, he was not raising his hand. He was only clapping.
I can always comment. I mean, I can always comment. And one of the other comments that I have is, you know, a lot of organizations invest a lot of time. I mean, the military and the VA, which I'm both intimately familiar with, invest significant amounts of time. And if you look at what that does for the person in terms of growth and in terms of providing a path for growth and expectations on how to advance, it's very fulfilling not only for the mentoree, but the mentor. And then the second thing is, you know, it has a huge impact on the organization. I don't remember the exact number for the military, but for physicians, 20% of the annual salary is spent in recruitment and retention. And so you're talking, you think about how many of the physicians that we have on staff, and if we're not keeping them, we're going to be looking for them. If we're not giving them growth opportunities, if we're not making them having a fulfilling work-life balance, these are things that are intangible in the educational process.
Yeah, that Canadian study that I showed at the beginning, the people that went through that course said that just being called a leader and sort of, you know, being selected for that sort of leadership group, they started seeing themselves as leaders. And so I think that that's a, you know, a really important part of just investing in our own people.
Shalak, do you have your official hand raised? Is that what I'm seeing? Maybe it's just not put down yet. Anybody else?
I think we're probably almost out of time anyway at 5 till. So I think on behalf of the panel, we just want to thank everybody for attending. And Sherry, are there any housekeeping issues as far as how they get credit or?
There aren't, other than if you, again, if you have a name that's indiscernible is connected with your Zoom account, please just let Deb Farron know or email her, and so that she can just count you that you've participated. So thank you all so much for attending. Thank you to the panel for a great presentation and some wonderful resources. As always, this session has been recorded. The PowerPoint presentation will also be on the website. If you, it's definitely something that I'm going to go back to and check out some of the resources that you provided. So thank you so much, and I hope everybody has a wonderful, healthy, and happy day.
Bye, everyone.